Hi, and welcome to Wrongful, a podcast where we look at cases of potential wrongful convictions. Follow along as we introduce you to our first case, the trial of Zachariah Anderson. Hi, and welcome to Wrongful, Episode 3, The Investigation. In our last two episodes, we've discussed the events and characters leading up to the May 17, 2020 disappearance of Rosalio Gutierrez. Shortly after he was declared missing, a group was created on Facebook for people to follow the investigation. Several people began asking about whether a search would be organized to check the areas surrounding Rosalio's apartment and volunteered to help. There were several key areas that seemed like obvious places to look, such as a large wooded area near Rosalio's apartment. There was also a local dump and a landfill. Some were baffled as to why no large search efforts had been organized in these places. In this episode, we'll explore the events unfolding shortly after the crime scene is discovered by Sadie on May 19th. We'll also be taking a look at the evidence found and discuss the investigative efforts conducted by the police, what was found in Rosalio's apartment, what was found by police in their searches. We'll also be giving our thoughts on some of the evidence that the trial by media crowd would end up using against Zach. If you're in our Wrongful Facebook group, you can view the evidence which we will be posting as you listen to this episode. We left off on May 19th with Sadie arriving at Rosalio's apartment for a wellness check following the 911 call she placed after finding a bloody scene. Allow me to set the scene since it's helpful to understand how Rosalio's apartment was laid out for the evidence to make better sense. Wood Creek Apartments consisted of multiple main buildings. Each building consisted of multiple two-story apartments and a shared main entrance, with 4 units upstairs and 4 units downstairs in each building. From the main entrance, you're able to see inside the corridor as you approach from the parking lot through a big window to the side of the door. As you enter the main door, there's a staircase immediately to the right that leads to the upstairs units, followed by a bank of mailboxes, and then Rosalio's apartment door. Anyone coming or going from the complex would walk right past his door. Once inside Rosalio's apartment, to the right, there's a small living area with a patio door. The patio door led to a small patio that faced the parking lot. The patio has a small slab of concrete and a grassy area with no fence or gate to block it off. So Rosalio's patio door would have been situated right next to the main entrance of the building and visible from the parking lot. From the parking lot, you could easily walk up to his patio door with no restrictions. Sadie said that when she arrived, she went to the patio door first.
I pulled up, I noticed that both of his vehicles were there. Both vehicles were there. His patio door was open, like the screen was closed, door was open. And I could tell from the parking lot. So I pulled up
And where did you proceed to?
So I kind of did a little self-talk in the car, and then I walked up to the screen door and noticed that, like I said, the glass door wasn't all the way closed. So I walked up. I believe I was on the phone with my friend at the time, and I called for him through the screen. The blinds were closed, so I couldn't exactly see inside directly, but I could tell that the screen was open, so I figured somebody would hear me if I would call through the screen. So I called his name a few times, and he didn't answer. So then I decided to go around into the main door.
Following this, she went through the main door.
When you went into the main door, is there a locked door to get there, or is that an unlocked door?
No, it's unlocked. So you can just go into the main door. And his apartment was to the right. So I proceeded to walk up to the door, and I knocked. And then as I walked up to the door, I noticed something on the wall by the door frame and the door where it connected. I noticed like something brownish. And I just kind of thought it my first thought was it looks like soy sauce. And I'm like, we didn't have like what it looked like something was thrown on the wall there and it wasn't there before. So it was kind of like, what is that? And then, like I said, I knocked on the door. I didn't get any answer. And then I tried to open the door and it was locked. And then I went to go knock again. And when I went to go knock on the door, I saw like brown dots. He has a red door, a dark red door, and I could see like the brown dots all over the door. I got a very sick feeling. I then decided to walk back outside and go to the main door. I opened the screen and I pushed the blinds aside, and I immediately saw red blood, just a lot of brownish, reddish blood on the floor. And the apartment looked different. It was, it looked different. It looked like furniture had been moved and strategically placed somewhere else. It did not look the way that it looked the night before. And I could tell something was missing, and I couldn't put my finger on it immediately. And then I then realized that it was the rug that was missing. And I freaked. I called his name, and then I remember my friend saying, you have to call 911, and I called 911.
She then called 911. One thing I noticed was Sadie saying, it didn't look like it did the night before. Was this just a slip of the tongue, and she was really referring to Saturday, the night she was there? Or did she really mean the night before? Police arrived shortly after 11 a.m. to investigate the crime scene, which I'll also lay out for you. As you enter Rosalio's apartment, to the right was his living room with an L-shaped couch resting against the front wall. To the left was a kitchen, separated by a partial wall with a window opening to the living room. Against that wall was a console table of sorts holding various items. Opposite the couch was a TV stand and TV, with the right wall containing the patio door as mentioned. To the left, past the kitchen, was a small dining area. This main area of the apartment is where the crime scene evidence would be contained. We'll be referencing these areas as we discuss the crime scene. According to Officer Nicholas Benvenuto's police report, when they arrived, they entered the apartment through the patio door and saw large amounts of blood throughout the living room and dining room area, and also some blood on the couch. He also mentioned that Sadie called out to them to let them know Rosalio's living room rug was also missing. The police also noticed that due to the muddy conditions outside, they had tracked in some footprints. Officer Van Wee submitted a report with more detailed findings of Rosalio's apartment. He described the pooled blood in the living room with a void where the rug most likely was, but the rug was no longer there. There were also several hairs and small pieces of wood fragments found on the floor. He also described there being blood splatters on the wall and ceiling throughout the living room area and some on the exterior door, indicating the door was open at one time during the attack. The bloodstains on the couch were on the upright cushion and on the seat, as if the victim had been sitting down and bleeding out at one point. Found on top of the seat cushion was a black wallet. It's worth noting that the wallet had no blood on it and there was no blood underneath it, suggesting that it had been placed after the fact. The actual money clip and card holder portion was missing. Also found in the living room was an open bottle of Corona beer and an open bottle of water, which we discussed in the last episode, along with the cutting board and limes in his kitchen. These just happened to be what Rosalio and Nareda planned to drink on Sunday night, as we saw in their text messages to each other. Speaking of Nareda, that same morning that Sadie discovered the scene, Nareda began taking screenshots of her conversation with Rosalio from Sunday night. If you remember correctly, they had planned to meet up, but she showed up late and waited in her car for 35 minutes before finally deciding to leave. It could have simply been a situation where she was ghosted, but for some reason she decided to screenshot their last text at this time, prior to even knowing that Rosalio was missing. The date and times of these screenshots would be brought up at trial. Back in Rosalio's apartment, the police noticed that a shoe mat was leaning against the wall by the door. Behind it on the wall were bloodstains, suggesting it had been moved after the fact. So far, we've seen two items that appear to have been staged following the bloody event: the wallet and now the shoe mat. The officer observed more bloodstains going toward a dinette table. The dinette table had droplets of blood on it and on the items situated on top of it. There was a tool bag sitting on the floor next to the patio door and a folding knife on a table several feet from the door. The officers lifted fingerprints from the Corona beer bottle, along with a Canada Dry bottle from the kitchen. Items collected for testing include a piece of couch fabric with blood, several sections of the living room carpet with blood, several articles of clothing, a laptop, toothbrushes, and other blood swabs. Not found in the apartment were any of Rosalio's shoes, his glasses, his credit cards, his keys, or his cell phone, all the things a person might have had on their person or take with them. The district attorney's office would develop a theory that a blitz attack is what occurred. Their theory was that Zach would have taken Rosalio by surprise and bludgeoned him to death. They claimed that the original attack must have happened in the hallway due to blood being on the exterior door. But other theories suggest this could have happened if the door was open and Rosalio was trying to escape. Remember, the entryway windows give a sight line to the building entrance, and any blitz attack would have been on display for anyone in the vicinity. The furniture in the apartment appeared untouched, which is surprising due to the struggle that they claim would have taken place. Here's Zach's defense attorney speaking more on this in the following clip.
If someone comes in and is doing a brutal bludgeoning beating, as the state said, this apartment is very small. No furniture was broken. No furniture was even disturbed to the point that the things on top of this little white table, which there was a remote, a game controller, a plant, some rocks, or on the dinette table, a computer, some other books. Nothing was even disturbed. Everything was nicely moved. But they didn't, they knew, and the evidence will show you that they knew everything had been moved. But they didn't process any of that evidence for latent fingerprints. They didn't take any swabs from those and then test the swabs for potential DNA evidence from things that, according to the state's theory, whoever hurt Mr. Gutierrez would have had to have touched.
Another piece of evidence that was noted by police was an aromatherapy diffuser, which was on one of Rosalio's living room side tables. It was the type of diffuser that you would add essential oils or fragrance along with the water, and it would diffuse the aroma into the room. When the police arrived midday on Tuesday, the diffuser was still running and could be seen running in evidence photos. We decided to do some research on this because we felt it would be a good indication to help us understand the timeline. Since Rosalio would have had to have turned it on before he was allegedly murdered, which was said to have been around 10 p.m. on Sunday the 17th, this would mean the diffuser was running for 36 plus hours. When we researched diffusers, including what appeared to be the same make and model that Rosalio owned, the maximum runtime was 18 hours, which is half the amount of time it would have needed before running out of water. So what does this mean? Either Rosalio was not killed at the time prosecutors allege, and he was able to turn it on much later, which presents a timeline inconsistent with Zach being the culprit, or somebody else had to have been in the apartment between the time Rosalio disappeared and when the police arrived. But what would they have been doing? Perhaps a cleanup? A Crime Stoppers tip indicated that someone believed to have seen a dark-haired woman on Rosalio's patio around Monday the 18th of May. Considering there are several women close to the case that fit this description, we wonder why the police didn't investigate the tip. We also know from Zach's phone records and alibi on Monday that he could not have returned there. If a diffuser would have been turned on Monday, it may have been possible that it was still going on Tuesday. Way more likely than it being turned on Sunday by Rosalio. In his report, Officer Benvenuto mentions that after doing the initial sweep of the scene, Sadie made a comment that her ex-boyfriend was highly upset she was dating Rosalio and that he had recently stolen Rosalio's registration from his car. She stated, "I'm not saying he did something, but he could have." By the time one of the lead detectives arrived, Sadie's accusation got even more specific. Detective Anschutz notes that Sadie immediately stated she suspected her ex-boyfriend, Zachariah Anderson, as having involvement because he had been recently stalking her. She stated he had been tracking her to Kenosha where she was every other weekend, and she believed he was tracking her cell and hacking into it. Sadie told the detective that she would explain everything, but first needed to pick up her children from a friend because she was concerned for their safety and wanted them with someone safe.
She said she was frightened for her children because she knew Zach Anderson had something to do with this.
She was instructed to return with her daughter, OA, who she stated would have pertinent information to the stalking and disappearance of Rosalio. We thought that Detective Anschutz's report about Sadie's statement is interesting, especially considering his report was not written until the day after Zach was charged with homicide in December of 2020, some 7 months after his arrest. Before he begins documenting Sadie's immediate accusations, he writes about how emotional she is, that she's sitting in the car crying and trembling. But why would he write this? No other report that we have reviewed presents the emotional state of the person interviewed, not even Zach or OA. They also belabored her emotional state in that moment during the trial, returning over and over again to how she was crying and appeared frightened. Now, we aren't doubting that one might cry or be feeling emotional in this situation. We think it's odd at how many times it is referenced and seemingly used to bolster her credibility. Another thought is that the stalking statute in Wisconsin requires that you prove the affected person suffered serious emotional stress and fear. At that time, the police did not have much evidence to prove stalking, so did they reference the emotional state to make their claim of stalking appear stronger so that they could use it as grounds for arresting Zach? If they only wrote it to justify those charges, why did they feel like they needed to if they had clear and convincing evidence otherwise? He had allowed Sadie to leave the scene without a full interview and without searching her person or her vehicle for any evidence. How do we know she hadn't just killed Rosalio herself and was about to drive off with his body or the murder weapon? Usually, the person to discover a crime scene is considered a prime suspect, or at least looked into, and this just wasn't done in this case. So, was he writing about how upset he perceived her to be and the fact that she was afraid for her children as a way to explain the negligence in letting her leave? If she said her kids were with a friend already, wouldn't that mean they were already somewhere safe? Why didn't she just ask the officers to dispatch someone for a wellness check of her kids if she still had concerns? Sadie has since changed her story as far as where their children were at the time. In trial, she stated that she left the scene before school got out and went straight home to talk to OA. She also stated that the twins were at daycare and she had already told them to notify her if Zach were to ever show up. So were they safe or were they not? She testified that she had only briefly mentioned to OA that her friend was missing the night before. So why did Sadie suddenly believe OA had pertinent information regarding this disappearance? Here's a clip of what she testified to in trial.
And on direct, you had testified that you told your daughter that you had concerns about your friend that was missing, correct?
Yes.
When did you have that conversation with your daughter?
On the 18th, when I couldn't get a hold of him all that day and night, I had mentioned something to her, and that it was just a brief mention. And then the 19th, when I came back home, I again just reminded her, like, hey, remember Mom was really worried? And she said, yeah, and went from there.
On May 18th, 2020, why did you tell your daughter that your friend was missing?
Because she could visibly see me crying and upset. And so she asked me what was wrong. And I told her that I was worried about Rosalio, about my friend missing.
If OA did share concerning information with her the night before, wouldn't Sadie have called the police for some sort of wellness check of Rosalio right then while speaking with her daughter? There's a lot of lingering questions about Sadie's immediate desire to leave the scene and whether she truly was afraid for her children, and the inconsistencies in her statement since. We don't want to make any accusations that Sadie was involved. However, we believe from the evidence we've seen that she really should have been investigated to at least rule these suspicions out. After Sadie left the scene, the police continued their search, checking the apartment complex's dumpster for any evidence. They checked both dumpsters on site and found that they were completely empty, appearing to have been emptied that morning. Around 2 p.m., Rosalio's ex-girlfriend and boss Eileen reached out to Michael Campbell. Here's a text exchange between the two.
Hi, Mike. Sorry to bother you. Have you heard from Rosalio the last couple of days? I tried to call, but it goes straight to voicemail. This is Eileen, by the way.
I've seen him Saturday. Is everything okay?
I was just checking to see if he was able to get the lights installed in that other unit in Hall. Just making sure he's okay. Not like him to have his phone off.
Okay, I'm doing some detective work for you.
Here's a clip of Campbell's testimony in court regarding this conversation.
Okay, so what do you tell Eileen Knoll?
I'm going to do some detective work.
Then, at that point, does Eileen Knoll respond to you at 2:20 and 41 seconds, again, May 19th?
Yes.
What does she say?
Okay, thanks. Just making sure he's okay.
Okay. So, to the extent you remember, what, if any, detective work did you do at that time? What's the next thing you did? Had you been to the scene yet at that time?
No.
Okay. So then, how long would you estimate it was from the last text sent to you, 2:20 p.m., How long was it before you went over to Rosalio's house after that text from Aunt Kaylee?
Within the hour for sure, because I live very close to him.
Around 3 p.m., Campbell heads over to Rosalio's apartment, where police are still conducting their investigation. He tells Eileen that he is at Rosalio's and that it is now a crime scene being investigated by police. He then goes home, where he says that his girlfriend at the time, Erica, does some online investigating. She looks up information about Zach, who is a person of interest already in the case. They obtain his address, and Campbell decides he's going to go pay him a visit. Around 3:30 p.m., Kayla, the mother of Rosalio's daughter, calls Celia, Rosalio's mother, to let her know what is going on and that Rosalio is missing. A few minutes later, at 3:40 p.m., Campbell makes a post on Facebook announcing Rosalio's disappearance. He asks that anyone with information contact him directly. There was no confirmation that Campbell had spoken to Celia or any of Rosalio's family prior to this. We thought that it was unusual not to check in with all the family members first, since the family could have details on where Rosalio could have been. Perhaps they knew information at the time that could shed light on the situation, like him being injured or taken to the hospital. We obviously know now that this didn't happen, but at the time you would think that would be one of the first things they would want to rule out, and a simple conversation with his family could have provided that. But it seems not all of Rosalio's family even knew he was missing until they saw this Facebook post. In fact, Rosalio's own son discovered his father was missing from Campbell's Facebook post. From the same post, another friend of Campbell's, Brandon Hendrickson, also became aware of the situation and offered to go with him to Zach's house. Meanwhile, the Kenosha police began conducting a drone search over some fields and ditches immediately west of Rosalio's apartment. By that time, Sadie had collected her daughter and arrived at the Kenosha Public Safety Building to be interviewed by police. Also around this time, Nareda comes across Campbell's missing person Facebook post, and she, believing she was the last person who spoke with Rosalio, contacts the police and makes plans to meet with them the following morning.
The night before, and it was a nighttime, and I said, oh geez, I gotta go over there and see what's going on.
You gotta go over there?
Like come to Kenosha and find out, like, is everything okay? Because I don't know. Like, I had the conversation last. And me working at the time period for the district attorney office, my job is important. I'm a mother, I don't know. I just thought the best thing to do was to give the officer my phone.
How did Nareda know at this time, though, that she was the last person who talked to him? Brandon arrives at Michael Campbell's house between 4:30 and 5 p.m., and they drive to Zach's home in Mequon, which is a little over an hour away. Or at least that's what they testify to. We do know that Christine was already at Zach's house when they arrived. The text messages between her and Zach show that she texted him at 7:34 p.m. stating she was walking out the door to go see him. When they arrive at his house, they park at the front of his driveway and make their way towards the house, where they see a man outside. Here's a clip of Campbell's testimony describing what he saw when they approached.
What was the defendant doing when you first saw him?
Throwing something away in the dumpster, on his phone.
And if you remember, what were the weather conditions like on that particular day when you arrived at his house? Rainy?
It was cloudy.
Okay. And when you were approaching, did you, if you were able to tell, were you able to notice the defendant first, or did he notice you first, if you could tell?
Honestly, when I walked up, it seemed like he kind of had his back to us throwing something in a dumpster, and so I believe I noticed him first.
Okay. And who said something first?
Me.
Okay. And what did you say to the defendant?
Said, hey, I'm here to look for Zachariah Anderson. It's about a friend that is missing, that I have believe that you have something to do with it.
It's worth noting that during this testimony and trial, when Campbell testified to what he said to Zach, that Zach visibly shook his head and mouthed, "That's not what happened." It sounds like Zach was caught off guard by the strangers on his property, and in the following clip, Campbell describes what happened next.
What, if anything, what did the defendant say when you said, "I'm looking for Zachariah Anderson and I am concerned he might have something to do with my missing friend"? What did he say, if anything?
He denied that it was himself. Said he was his brother or something. And that he said he was going to call him or something.
And what happened next?
He went inside.
He is who?
Zach
Okay, that's the defendant?
Yes.
Okay, then what happened?
He went inside and I don't know what he did. Obviously, he was inside.
Zach lived in a rural setting, and unexpected visitors on his property was not something he was used to. According to his brother Solomon, in a post-trial interview, it is believed one of the men was possibly armed. Zach felt uncomfortable enough to go inside and call 911. This may explain why Zach thought it was best not to tell them who he was and instead say that he was his brother, as Campbell claimed. If people seemed angry and intimidating, like they may want to pick a fight with you, it would make sense to want to stall until authorities came to defuse the situation, not because you're hiding something. If you had just committed a murder and had been cleaning up the evidence, would you willingly invite police to come over to your home? You would think this would be the last thing you would want to do. Or, if you had been planning a getaway, it seems this would be the time you would make your move to escape. But it seems Zach instead felt like he had nothing to hide. What was not mentioned in trial is that Mequon PD had already begun to set a perimeter around Zach's house before Campbell ever went there at all. Mequon PD were alerted by Kenosha PD that Zach was a person of interest for stalking, and Mequon PD were supposed to hold the perimeter while they waited for search warrants. The police reports show that Mequon PD actually, for some reason, mistook Michael Campbell and Brandon Hendrickson for undercover officers and waved them through into Zach's property before they confronted him. So now we have a second situation where police are bungling their investigation. The first occurred when Detective Anschutz allowed Sadie to leave the crime scene without any further investigation into her being a possible suspect. And now, by allowing Rosalio's friends to trespass and break their perimeter, possibly with a weapon. Campbell says that he and Brandon then leave Zach's house and make their way to Sadie's home. They parked in a bar parking lot which was next to her home. They claim they did not make any contact with her, but just sit outside. Campbell testifies that after leaving Sadie's, he speaks with a detective on the phone and lets him know that he was at Zach's house, which the detective was not happy about. But Campbell couldn't resist going back to Zach's house one more time. At this point in time, Campbell testified that he saw the police at Zach's house and drove home. Michael Campbell claimed in his trial testimony that Zach's house was on the way home from Sadie's, but in fact, it was not on the way at all. Zach's brother Solomon discusses this in the following clip. If you're following along with the evidence photos, this map can be found for reference.
Sadie's home was right over here. Okay? So Sadie used to live right here. This is right next to another major freeway that comes down the west side of Milwaukee. Right there. So if Michael Campbell were to be using his GPS after driving from Zach to Sadie's house, he would have then taken GPS home right down the freeway this direction, completely avoiding Zach's house again. But that's not what he testified to. He testified to the idea that he drove back past Zach's house because that was the way home from visiting Sadie's house to then drive back down to Kenosha.
You testified on direct examination that you had returned back to Mr. Anderson's home? That you went to Mr. Anderson's home, you went to Sadie Beecham's home, then you went back to Mr. Anderson's
We
home?
drove past.
Okay, and you said that was on your way home?
Yeah.
So where did Miss Beecham live, to your understanding?
I don't know. GPS, I'm not familiar with the area. So I couldn't tell you northwest, east, none of that.
Okay, and you said you used your GPS?
Yes.
On your phone?
Probably yes.
So your phone record should show you in those locations?
Should.
Okay.
So if GPS would not have taken Campbell back to Zach's house, why did he want to go back there? And why would he try to say it was GPS that led him there? Campbell also gave two different stories regarding how he obtained Zach's address.
Mr. Campbell gives different sequence of events to different officers. The first officer he talks to about how he got Mr. Anderson's address, he tells them that he reached out to Miss Patterson and Miss Patterson gave her that information. How Miss Patterson had Mr. Anderson's address, I don't know. The second time he gives a statement, which is a written statement to law enforcement, he says that he was doing Facebook stalking and he found Sadie and he found Zach and then he had his girlfriend find Mr. Anderson's address. Two completely different stories. So here we have an individual who's been interjecting themselves into the investigation, who according to Mr. Gutierrez, could have been one of the last people to see him, and law enforcement never even asked to see his phone. Never investigates if he saw Mr. Gutierrez, where he was the night of the 17th, doesn't address any of these discrepancies.
Campbell and Eileen also text more.
She and her baby daddy need to be investigated, like, right fucking now.
I agree. Call the detective at 7. In a meeting till then.
Following Zach's 911 call about the two men on his property, the police received their warrants and showed up to arrest him for the stalking charges alleged by Sadie. No charges or citations were issued to Campbell or Brandon for trespassing or for interfering with the police investigation. It should be noted that part of the reason the PD would have wanted OA's testimony is because they couldn't justify probable cause for search or arrest just based on Sadie's word alone. At the time, Sadie had no concrete proof of the stalking she was claiming. All of the information we see at trial was gathered through the police search. Sadie only had suspicions and accusations, and police cannot perform a search or arrest on reasonable suspicion alone. They had to have corroborating information to show probable cause to start their investigation into Zach. Is this why Sadie was so eager to leave the crime scene earlier? Was she buying herself some time to speak with OA to make sure her claims would be corroborated? We'll explore some of OA's testimony in a later episode. The police take Zach into custody and began interrogating him at nearly 11 p.m. that night. He began the interview already exhausted. When he was asked where he was on Sunday night, he could not remember the details exactly, but thought that he had probably been with his girlfriend Christine, who he spent most nights with. Christine was asked the same thing, and she told police she couldn't remember exactly, but thought she was with Zach. She suggested they check with her sister who lived with her to see if she could remember better. Her sister testified that Zach had not come over that night. Due to the conflicting original testimony, people accused Zach of lying and Christine of covering for him. Here's a clip of Christine's testimony. There was an issue with the trial audio during her testimony, so please excuse the poor quality here, but what she has to say is important.
So I want to go back a little bit. The state had been talking to you about the first statement you gave law enforcement on the 19th, and then the second time you talked to them 2 days later. You had told law enforcement on the 19th that you had memory problems, and that's why it would probably be better to ask your sister, right?
I didn't specifically say that I have memory problems, no, but considering me and my sister lived together, and I was going back to work, and I do have shit drinks, so no, I'm not good at remembering dates, but knowing my routine, and that was what I told the authorities.
So, but when you told them that, it was because you weren't 100% sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Because usually he was over there. The only time that he wasn't over there, either we were working or he was with his kids.
And so then on the 21st, which was 2 days after you first spoke with law enforcement, you told them after seeing more information that he was not at the house on the 17th, correct?
Correct. And when I got asked and I thought he was there, I even had them look at my phone. So for them to say that I lied or I was covering up and harass me about it is not right. It's not okay.
Here in Christine's testimony, she claims she made an honest mistake. And in thinking about it, looking back several nights ago, I couldn't tell you offhand exactly what I was doing. In fact, how many of us could go back to a particular night and remember exactly how we spent it? Yeah, perhaps if you had done something out of the ordinary or noteworthy, but what if it was just a mundane night in? I think most people would probably just assume you did what you always do. We saw this with Rosalio's neighbors who were questioned about their activities that night when he went missing. Most could not tell you specifics. They could only testify to their habits and what they usually did. I don't believe it was any different for Zach and Christine. However, the police ran with the assumption that Zach was lying to them, and despite not finding any direct evidence at his home tying him to the disappearance of Rosalio, they held him in jail on stalking charges. The following day, May 20th, Nareda showed up at the police station and shared the screenshots she had taken from days prior. However, there were some text messages missing from what she sent the detectives. The missing texts were regarding the time she was supposed to arrive at Rosalio's. If you remember, she was supposed to arrive at 9 p.m., which was right around the time Rosalio arrived home from dropping off his kids. She didn't end up arriving until nearly 40 minutes later, with no calls and no texts notifying him she was running late. Was she worried how these texts would make her look because she supposedly arrived late around the same time Rosalio was being murdered, or was it just coincidental oversight? The police that day would also execute several warrants to search Zach's property. During the trial, Detective Anschutz confirmed that they did not specifically investigate anyone else.
So you had noted during your direct examination that you were an investigator in this case, correct?
Detective, yes.
And role of a detective in a case with a missing person is to try to figure out what happened to them.
Yes.
And where they might be.
Yes.
And who may have been involved in the disappearance.
Yes.
So, besides Mr. Anderson, who did you investigate as being involved in the disappearance?
Personally, I didn't investigate into anybody else. We did look. We looked for other leads, other clues, other evidence. But personally, I didn't take the initiative to go look specifically at somebody else.
Lead Detective Correa even testified that they had secured the dump site where the contents of the dumpster outside of Rosalio's had been disposed of, but decided to release it before searching in order to allocate their resources to investigate Zach. For all we know, Rosalio's remains or the murder weapon could have simply been discarded in the dumpster outside of his apartment and then brought to the landfill. Because they decided not to search there, we'll never know. Their search at Zach's would consist of searching the inside of Zach's home, the exterior buildings, his property including a burn pit. They would also bring in canine dogs. They would end up taking his vehicles into custody for further searching. Inside his home, the police would find marijuana, and the police believed that Zach had a growing operation. Although marijuana is legal in many places now, it is not legal in Wisconsin. They found cash in the amount of $47,730. The police took the cash into custody, documenting the total number of each denomination. It would be important to note that about a month later, on June 25th, the evidence department would provide a receipt for this money. However, their receipt would only account for $47,230. No explanation for this $500 which went missing while in police custody was provided. This money would be turned over to the U.S. Marshals, where it has yet to have been recovered to this day. The prosecutors and the media used this money as an argument that Zach was planning a getaway, but there are no other signs or evidence that Zach was planning this. In fact, why would he invite the police to his home if he was planning an escape? In the following interview clip, his brother Solomon explains why his brother would have had this amount of money in his home.
What they never talked about was that my brother and I would, he did a lot of the research and finding properties to buy on sheriff's sale in the Milwaukee area, and especially the northern suburbs. So he would go to the sheriff's sale, which is a property auction for homes that were foreclosed on, and then he would have to pony up a cash purchase of a property. So him having a sum of money to go purchase a property when the time was needed is not a foreign concept. That was something that had happened already twice.
The idea that Zach was instead planning to use this money to make a run for it just doesn't make sense. Evidence shows that Zach was making plans for his future and trying to win custody of his kids. The argument the prosecution used to explain why Rosalio would never have just disappeared and abandoned his kids would also apply to Zach. He was a devoted father, and his priority at the time was setting up a good life for his kids. In hopes of winning custody, he had begun cleaning out his home to begin the renovation project to create a better living environment. During the trial, photos of the interior of Zach's home would be shown. People described what they saw as a home of squalor. It was very bare bones and looked like it was in the process of being gutted. And that was true. As mentioned in our first episode, Zach was in the process of preparing to do renovations on the older home, which required new electrical work. Zach was fine living very humbly, so he hadn't made it a priority in the past, instead using his money to provide for his kids and invest in income properties with his brothers. Some of the people who saw these images used it as another attempt to attack Zach because they felt by him living this way, it means he was also a murderer. But that conclusion just isn't logical, and it's not based on evidence. The police also searched his exterior buildings, where they found unopened bottles of bleach and various tools. The bottles of bleach had apparently been sitting a while because they had accumulated layers of dust. They found a chainsaw that Zach had used over the weekend at the tree farm. The chainsaw and some of the tools had a red liquid on it. The same red liquid would be found in the back of his work van, leading many to wonder if this was in fact blood, indicating a potential body disposal. But testing would later rule this out, as it tested negative for blood. It is believed that these stains are from bar and chain oil, which, if you are familiar with its use, is an oil used for chainsaws and is a reddish color. So with the chainsaw being in the van and near tools, it definitely would have had the potential to rub off and leave these stains. The police also searched the burn pit, where they found some burnt furniture, burnt clothing items, and a burnt bottle of bleach. The burnt bottle of bleach led people to believe that he had been using it to clean up a crime scene. But knowing that Zach had several bottles of bleach on his property for an extended period of time indicates that this was a product that Zach kept on hand. So while the bleach could have been used to clean a crime scene, it is also used for a number of household purposes and in renovating old buildings or in dealing with mold mitigation, like what might have happened after a home flooding or in doing demo work. Therefore, this bleach bottle found in a burn pit with other trash does not mean Zach committed a murder. However, police would cling to this evidence and the media would run with it as a presumption of his guilt. Another interesting thing to note revolves around the clothing found in the burn pit. There was a misconception by the media and social media commentators that this clothing found belonged to Rosalio, but this was false. Firstly, the clothing all had various states of burning, which shows that they were burned over time, not all at once. They showed a button from a pair of jeans in court testimony, but what they did not show was that there were a total of 42 buttons found in that burn pit, as well as zippers and other remnants. Finding one button can look suspicious, but when you see there are a bunch of buttons, it shows there is a pattern. They also found a sock with DNA on it. The DNA on the sock belonged to Zach. We know that there was a flood recently at Zach's home and that he did not own a washing machine. So the idea of burning old damaged clothes instead of trying to figure out how to wash them could have made more sense. The burn pit is also something that people seem to be really stuck on and use to defend their notion that Zach must be guilty. To many people, the idea of someone burning personal items is so foreign. Even owning a burn pit seemed odd for some people. I personally grew up in the city and didn't know this was a thing. It wasn't something we did where I'm from. But if you grew up in the country or a rural area, perhaps the idea isn't as strange to you. In the country, you have far less regulations on burning. People there seem to be more self-sufficient and do as much stuff on their own as they can. Instead of driving a distance and paying money to dispose of things, it just makes more sense to burn it and get rid of it yourself. Instead of bagging up your yard waste and leaves, the majority of people in the country will burn it. While Zach did have a dumpster he used for his job, the dumpster would quickly get filled if he was throwing all these things in it, and the dumpster space equals more money. Zach is known for having fires on his property, and his friend Andrew testified about being invited to Zach's for a bonfire that past weekend. And while bonfires and roasting marshmallows in the rain usually isn't popular, just burning items isn't completely out of the question. People thought that him burning items in the rain was weird, and he must have been so desperate to get rid of evidence. But ask yourself, if he was so desperate to get rid of evidence, why would he attempt to do so in the rain? We know that the fire definitely was not hot enough to have completely burned up a body. It would have been impossible in the rain. And he would have known the items that he did throw in weren't completely burned, yet he still invited police over? This suggests to us that the fire he had wasn't of a nefarious nature, even if it wasn't something most people might do. So, in my opinion, the burn pit did not indicate Zach had anything to do with a crime. The police also pumped Zach's septic tank to look for blood, DNA, or anything that would indicate a cleanup or body disposal. Nothing was found. They emptied the dumpster used on his property for demo. They found the demolition debris that Zach had taken from the property he was working on for Susan. We played her testimony in our last episode describing how Zach would take the demo debris to his house where he would dispose of it in his dumpster. This corroborates his testimony. Anything that the canine dogs marked on would come back negative for anything human corpse related, nor was there any link to Rosalio found. Not one thing. Now the items they did find at Zach's house, the money, the burnt clothes, the burnt bleach bottle, and the whole burn pit in general would be used as circumstantial evidence against him, despite the explanation for those items. While we agree that circumstantial evidence is valuable and can lead to a conviction of a crime, there has to be direct evidence also involved. Otherwise, circumstantial evidence can be found anywhere or with anything. I imagine you could go into anyone's house and find things that could be used in a crime. The large knife in your kitchen drawer, the duct tape in your garage. All of those things could look suspicious if you're being accused of a crime, but unless there is other direct evidence linking you to that crime, that circumstantial evidence should not indicate guilt. The police would also visit several businesses on the route from Rosalio's apartment to Mequon, looking for any camera footage implicating Zach. They found nothing. He was also not seen on any traffic cams on the major highways. If he had taken back routes, that would not have given him enough time to have gotten home, where his phone pinged just after 11 p.m. They also subpoenaed Zach's bank statements and phone records. The police's next search would involve the Anderson family tree farm, which was maintained by his dad and older brother Josh. They would also search Susan's property where Zach had been working. Despite a large amount of manpower and canine dogs, nothing of evidentiary value was found in any of these places. The police would next look into the Walmart trip Zach made. which we mentioned he visited Monday morning. He had looked up the store hours the night before and arrived there early to pick up some things before driving to his work site doing demo work. If you recall, the items he purchased were Q-tips, Old Spice, a shaver, 2 boxes of kitchen-sized 13-gallon garbage bags, disposable gloves, 3 cans of sardines, and some Clorox wipes. The disposable gloves, trash bags, and Clorox wipes would be used against him to suggest he was cleaning up a crime scene. If you remember correctly, this was all going on in May of 2020. It was the beginning of COVID and Clorox wipes and gloves were a very common thing being purchased at the time. But Zach was also doing demo work and dealing with some unpleasant materials, which would also explain why he might want these gloves even if there wasn't a pandemic going on. Have you ever tried to clean up blood or any other messy liquid with a Clorox wipe? It doesn't work very well. While they are great at disinfecting, they are not so great at absorbing liquids, and the box of trash bags were found unused in his vehicle. Another interesting theory we saw was that he purchased the sardines to hide the odor of a decomposing body. But would sardines really mask that, or would it make the odor worse? I think the combination of a dead body and sardines would be an even bigger disaster and draw more attention to an already bad problem. I would think that Febreze would have been a much better option if that was the case. That's besides the fact, though, because the sardines were never even opened.
In the car, when it was searched, there were 2 opened but uneaten cans of sardines. Those sardine cans were not opened. They're bizarre. It's a clear top sardine, so that it looks opened, but it's not. That was confirmed by reviewing the actual sardine cans that were recovered.
As we mentioned prior, Zach ate simple foods. Sardines were a common source of protein for him and an easy and convenient snack. At this point, we also wondered what evidence was there that Rosalio was deceased. Well, it seems likely, due to the substantial amount of blood found and the fact that he was missing, someone being injured and kidnapped could have produced the same evidence. How would Zach have been able to remove Rosalio by himself, with a bad back, without anyone seeing him, in enough time to make it home, without any evidence being found? Once again, we know from Narita's testimony that there were people in and out that night, but no one testified to seeing or hearing a thing. In the June 6 article of the Kenosha News, Rosalio's mother Celia said that she felt it was more than one person, stating, "There at least had to be 2 people. He's a fairly large man. There would be no way that one person could have done this." But then in trial, she would testify saying that he had lost weight as to make it more credible that Zach could have done this. But she would have had that information when she gave her original statement. Why did she suddenly believe it was one person? Was it because the police investigated everyone close to Zach and found that none of them had anything to do with it? We have so much sympathy for what Celia has gone through, and putting myself in her shoes, it may be easier to accept the suspect the police present so that I could get some kind of closure. Was it easier just to go along with the police's suspect? After being notified of her son's disappearance, Celia would arrive in Kenosha from Colorado. Days after he went missing, his apartment would be released to her by police, and she began to undertake the task of cleaning it. The first place she started was in the kitchen. While beginning to remove food from the fridge and freezer, she came across his cell phone, money clip, credit cards, and driver's license. But remember, Celia had told the Kenosha News back on May 20th that his cell phone was found. Did she misspeak? We know that it wasn't found then, and that she is claiming to have found it on May 28th. Either police did not do a thorough check of the apartment and missed this, or somehow they returned it later. There were 15 hours between when the scene was released by police and when Celia arrived. During that time, the scene was not secured, meaning it was possible that someone could have returned during that time. It's very strange that during the amount of time the police investigated the scene, that no one checked inside the freezer. When the cell phone was tested for DNA, they found a single source male profile, and Rosalio was the source. There were trace alleles found on it as well, but no further testing was done. According to the forensic testing report, they said that no conclusion will be made on it. So did this mean they didn't test it? And if not, why? They also found DNA on a razor blade that was taken from Rosalio's apartment. The DNA was found to be a single source male, and they excluded Rosalio, Zach, and Rosalio's son. Is it possible the DNA on this razor could belong to the actual killer? These pieces could be irrelevant, but we don't know, because the police never tested them. The police would get statements from those who knew both Rosalio and Zach to see if they could learn more about what was going on in their lives at the time. These statements would not be included in the trial due to it being hearsay evidence, but it gives insight into their background and the perceptions of those close to them regarding what they knew at the time. The police would question both Zach's brothers and a sister. His brother Josh would state that he believed that Sadie jerked Zach around with custody and that they have been on and off for years. He states Zach still loves Sadie but doesn't get sad over her. Zach had told him that Sadie was dating someone new and that Zach had checked out his CCAP to get his background. He stated Zach loved Sadie but wasn't able to live with her. He stated the final straw of their relationship was when Zach gave Sadie money to pay for daycare and she used it to go to Mexico instead. Solomon stated that it was his belief that Sadie wasn't stable and has falsely accused Zach of many things throughout their relationship, so they disagree frequently. Solomon stated that he did not know Rosalio, but Zach had mentioned a guy Sadie had been seeing because he was upset about his children being around other men. He stated Zach did not care that Sadie was dating someone. Zach's sister Zenith stated that she lives in Texas and arrived in town on the birthday of Zach's daughter OA and attended a birthday party for her, where OA told her she went to Sadie's one night with Zach and saw Sadie's boyfriend there. She stated that while she was at Sadie's for the birthday party, OA told her not to sit on the couch because Sadie's boyfriend put boogers on it. She stated she also spoke with Sadie at the party, and Sadie asked her if she knew anything about Zach stalking her, but Zenith knew nothing. She stated Sadie denied having a boyfriend, and it was only after the boyfriend went missing that Sadie brought up dating anyone to her. These statements also include 2 women from previous relationships. One of these women, Jennifer, stated that Zach was a simple guy that lived in a motorhome at the time she knew him and sent all his money to Sadie. She described Zach as a person that kept to himself. She stated Zach had told her that Sadie was dating a different guy, but she didn't know who it was. She stated Zach didn't care and wasn't bothered by the breakup with Sadie. She mentioned she was aware that Zach had a bad back and knew nothing about any drugs other than that Zach was arrested in South Dakota. The other woman, Sasha, stated that she didn't know Sadie and didn't know Zach and Sadie's situation, only that Zach had told her that Sadie was dating several people. She stated Zach told her that Sadie wanted the relationship to work, but he didn't. She stated Zach mentioned seeing Sadie and a guy and something about a birthday party. They did not have anything bad to say about Zach, which I believe speaks volumes, as typically an ex is the first to share dirt. Also, typically, an abuser/narcissist will have other victims or patterns of past behavior. The police interviewed Rosalio's uncle Eulalio, who stated he and Rosalio were close, but would occasionally go a few weeks without speaking. He stated no one had heard from Rosalio in a few days, including the mothers of his 2 children, so they attempted to contact him. He stated that he was not aware of Rosalio having any issues with anyone, but was told through family members that Rosalio was having issues with his new girlfriend's ex, whose name he did not know. They interviewed some of Rosalio's ex-girlfriends. His ex-girlfriend and good friend Katie Dill told police she and Rosalio dated on and off for a while, but ultimately broke up because of his issues with drinking. She said his drinks of choice were Corona and Jameson, but that he never got violent with her. Eileen Knoll also reported a similar experience in her statement, stating that her 2-year relationship with Rosalio didn't work out because of his problems with alcohol, but he had since fixed the issues. She stated he had been attending AA for nearly a year and had quit drinking. She described him as a passive person when he wasn't drinking. It does appear that Rosalio had started drinking again due to the Corona beers that were found in his apartment, although there is no evidence that it had become a problem in his life at this time. Now, one interview statement we found strange was a man named Alexander, whose wife had worked with Rosalio some 10 years back and hadn't seen him in 3 years. He stated he had received a letter at his P.O. box addressed to the Take Care of Junior, which, if you recall, Junior is what those who were close to Rosalio called him. Alexander said following the letter, they learned about Rosalio's disappearance on Facebook and felt it was suspicious, but the contents were regarding DJ promotions. The letter was postmarked in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on 5/18/2020, which was the day after Rosalio went missing. The reason this caught our eye was the DJ promotions. One of the contacts that had been found in Rosalio's vehicle was what was described as a Dear John letter about someone named DJ. While we don't have either of these statements to compare, we do think the timing is strange and wonder why it wasn't looked into further. Now, once again, none of these statements could be deemed relevant to the trial, and none of these items pertaining to Rosalio or Zach's background was let in. One could argue that this background information could provide some insight. So far, we have posed some questions regarding the testimony and circumstances of some of the other characters in this case, not to accuse anyone else. These people all deserve to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Our only goal in providing this information is to show that the police did not thoroughly investigate other people and that they honed in on Zach from the start while neglecting to search elsewhere. As we've discussed, the police so far have found nothing tying Zach to Rosalio's apartment and nothing tying Rosalio to Zach's property. Despite not finding any link, he remained the only focus of the investigation. We can see that before any evidence is even released to the public, people have already sold into the idea Zach was behind it and is definitely guilty. Their actions speak to the new standard being seen, where people are looked at as guilty unless proven innocent, which is completely backward to what our forefathers required. Before any evidence has even been released, people are already hammering in on his guilt. This may be in part because they see the police narrow in on one person, and despite coming to dead end after dead end, they keep pursuing him as their only suspect. Here is a clip from the defense attorney's opening statement.
They decided to build a script and tell a story and make Mr. Anderson the main character, despite the fact that they didn't have any of this evidence. No body, no human remains, no witnesses, Nothing. If you're looking in the wrong places and at the wrong people, you are not going to find the information you're looking for.
But law enforcement and the DA's office would continue to dig to make this case against Zach. Eventually, 7 months later, they would find something that they would hang their hat on and cause them to officially file homicide charges against Zach. This would be the only thing tying Zach to Rosalio, but there was a lot of questionable details surrounding it. In our next episode, we'll explore this finding and start to see how the district attorney's office spun their wheels to try to make a case that would eventually go viral. Bye everyone, and thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and want to catch our next episode, please make sure to follow Wrongful on all of your favorite podcast platforms, and don't forget to rate us. We would also love it if you would follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X under Wrongful Pod. Keep the fun going in between episodes by joining our Wrongful Podcast group on Facebook to see evidence, discuss episodes, and more.